So Comair got the go-ahead to enter into provisional liquidation this week after an abrupt grounding of its Kulula and BA flights earlier this month. The company had been in business rescue since March 2020, but unfortunately, come the 11th hour, there simply wasn't enough money to keep planes in the sky. So what went wrong? Hilary Joffe, writing for Business Day, says while COVID lockdowns were a contributing factor, it alone did not lead to Comair's demise. And she joins us now from London. Hilary, thank you so much for your time. Really thought-provoking article. So COVID made things worse, but it wasn't the main problem. What was the main problem in your assessment?
Yes, Sally, I don't think COVID was the cause of them going into business rescue, and it wasn't the cause of their not coming out of business rescue, but it certainly was the last straw in both cases. I think it's the old story. If the business model is not the right business model, especially in an industry like the airline industry, where the black swan event is is the norm rather than the exception. They've had ash clouds, they've had fuel price crises, they've had COVID. You do have to tailor your business model and your cost structure to a rough industry. And Comair had sort of come apart before COVID and was being turned around. And I think they should have used the business rescue process and the protection it offers to right-size the airline, find a business model which would make it more robust in the face of crises. Whatever reason, they did not do that, and the investors didn't put in enough money, and unfortunately, here we are.
You write about what you call an ambitious expansion plan, and you essentially talk about a really bad strategic mistake made on the part of the airline to try and expand and grow, when in fact they should have been trimming their wings a little bit and just holding steady on keeping things lean and mean. We've seen the unions criticize CEO Glenn Osmond, saying it's actually bad management. Would you agree with them?
I'm not qualified to declare who is or isn't bad management, but what is interesting is that there were at least two rival bids for the airline, and with whoever and this consortium led by Glenn Osmond, which was the one that was chosen. There was another consortium in which Lanseria and management and Harith, which is also our owner of Business Day, was involved, which had a very different business model, which was to shrink, consolidate, and only then grow. Now, whether that would have worked out any better, it's impossible to say with hindsight. But the point, perhaps, is that there was more than one way of trying to get this airline out of business rescue. Glenn Osmond's consortium chose a pretty ambitious way of doing it, which involved sort of trying to regain Comair's former glory from long ago when they were the market leader. But the market had changed. And even without it was very different to what the market which they had previously been the leaders of before.
Yeah, you make such an interesting point in the article about the business rescue process, and I thought your history explaining that I think it was introduced in this country in around 2008 to help companies avoid going into liquidation. And you say the business rescue process often fails if the reason the company got into such dire straits in the first place is not fixed. Why do you think the business rescue process was unable to fix the problem, which sounds from what you're saying like the plans were too ambitious, or was it by then just too late?
Business rescue is a complicated process, and it has some flaws. For example, in theory, the business rescue practitioners take over, but in practice, the roles of the board and the investors and the management is complicated. So, as I argued in the article, if you do not fix what got you into business rescue, your chances of getting out of business rescue successfully are not so good. And the business rescue practitioners task is to get the company solvent again and get the creditors a better deal than they would have got otherwise. It is not really to devise a business model. They looked for funders or new investors who would take the airline forward. Why they chose this particular consortium, I'm sure they had a good reason, but this consortium really in the end didn't have enough money to keep it aloft, and arguably chose a model which perhaps in other circumstances could have worked, but in this particular circumstance definitely didn't work.
Yeah. I mean, you've mentioned the factor that COVID was pretty much the nail in the coffin, all those lockdowns. Also, they were grounded earlier this year over safety concerns. And of course, you mentioned the fact that SAA owed the airline 760 million rand. So all those factors conspiring. And that if you're on the wrong flight path, I suppose, in terms of your business strategy, it's going to be very, very difficult to stay afloat. But I think, you know, for those of us who look at the demise of Kulula and find it quite sad, because it was a lovely brand, it was quite a hopeful, positive, energizing brand, and concerns about the airline industry domestically. Obviously, globally, there are others, major concerns as well. What are the big lessons, Hilary? Because there are going to be more players in the market, I'm sure. What would you say out of this failure are the lessons to be learned by the local aviation industry?
And globally, aviation is an industry where airlines quite often do go into business rescue, and it's not uncommon globally for airlines to file for business rescue, or whatever they call it in the US, Chapter 11, as a way of restructuring, because it gives you protection from your creditors and it enables you to downsize, restructure, which you should take that opportunity to do. So it is quite common in the industry globally. We've had quite a few liquidations and airlines crashing, as it were, in South Africa. Comair is an interesting case study because it really set the tone for privately run successful airlines back in the day. For 70 years, it made a profit every single year before COVID changed its business model several years before and got quite ambitious and ran up a lot of debt, and then was hit by a whole series of things, eventually COVID included, and didn't restructure enough to get itself fit for COVID, and then didn't do that coming out again. So there's a business case study about tailoring your business model in a difficult industry to make it resilient to circumstances and black swan events. And I'm sure that people will be looking at this as a case study. But Sally, the other thing which I did look at in Business Day today was the competition issues, which I also found very interesting, because the Competition Commission was very quick to jump up and say, oh, no price gouging. We are going to intervene. We are going to keep this industry kind of from running away with itself and kind of exploiting consumers. And I'm not sure that this is a matter for the competition authorities. We have quite a competitive airline market in South Africa. SAF Air is now the market leader by far, but we have several others. Airlink, Lift, SAA is back in the air, Comair. It's a market with a decent number of players competing, and historically, when we've seen airlines go down in South Africa, it does mean a short-term price spike when there's not enough capacity and too much demand. But that very price signal of the higher prices brings new capacity into the market, because airlines can keep their existing aircraft in the air more. They can fly more flights. They can lease or borrow in more aircraft. And a lot of airlines now have the kind of model where in any event they don't own their own aircraft. They lease them from people like Global Aviation, which is what SAA is planning, is doing, Lift does, so they can bring capacity in quite quickly. And I don't think that the competition authorities need to intervene in a market where there is competition, and the price signal will, I hope, rebalance that market quite quickly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. Some very important points made about the demise of Comair by Hilary Joffe. She's the editor-at-large for the Business Day publication.